Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone.
Séance.
I call our meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 9 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts of the House of Commons.
Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person, although we have some witnesses joining us online on the Zoom application. I'd like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hands if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom, and the clerk and I will endeavour to recognize you. Conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement, le comité entre...
Pursuant to Regulation 108.3G, the committee is commencing consideration of Report 5, Professional Services Contracts 2024, Reports 5 to 7 of the Auditor General of Canada, referred to the committee on Tuesday, the 4th of June, 2024.
Welcome our witnesses. I'm glad we have a large table today. From the Office of the Auditor General, Andrew Hayes, good to see you. Welcome back. Deputy Auditor General, Aliha Haji, Director, nice to see you as well. Nicholas Swale, Principal, nice to see you as well. From the Canada Infrastructure Bank, I believe joining us online, Aaron Corey, Chief Executive Officer, thank you for being here virtually. Frédéric Duguay, General Counsel and Corporate Security. From the Department of National Defense, Stephanie Beck, Deputy Minister, nice to see you back. Nice to see you back so quickly. Lieutenant General Prévost, Chief Professional Conduct and Culture, nice to see you again, sir. From the Department of Public Works and Government Services, Ariane Reza, Deputy Minister, nice to see you back as well. Catherine Poulin, Assistant Deputy Minister, Department Oversight Branch, and Dominic Laporte, Assistant Deputy Minister, Procurement Branch. I understand there'll be a series of opening statements. We'll begin with the Deputy Auditor. Mr. Hayes, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our report on professional services contracts, which was tabled in Parliament in June 2024. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Joining me today from our office are Nicholas Swales, Principal, and Aliha Haji, Director. This audit looked at whether federal contracts awarded to McKinsey & Company between 2011 and 2023 complied with applicable policies and provided Canadians with value for money. These contracts spanned 20 federal organizations, including 10 Crown corporations. The total value of contracts awarded to McKinsey & Company during the period totaled $209 million, of which about $200 million was spent. We found that the organizations awarding the contracts showed a frequent disregard for federal contracting and procurement policies and guidance. We also found that each organization's own practices often did not demonstrate value for money. The extent of non-compliance and risks to value for money varied across the organizations. For example, in 10 of the 28 contracts that were awarded through a competitive process, the bid evaluations did not include enough information to support the selection of McKinsey & Company as the winning bidder.
We also found that the justification required for awarding a contract without a competitive process was often missing. Approximately 70% of the 97 contracts awarded to McKinsey & Company that we examined were non-competitive contracts worth approximately $118 million. We also sampled 33 contracts that we reviewed to assess value for money. We found that nearly half of the contracts did not describe the need or gap that the contract was intended to address. For 15% of the contracts, the statement of deliverables in the contract was unclear, and for 18% of the contracts, there was no confirmation that the government had obtained all the deliverables. Public Service and Procurement Canada, as the central agency responsible for procurement and contracts and an expert in this subject for the Government of Canada, had not questioned the decisions of federal organizations when the department had awarded certain contracts on their behalf. The department did not question the appropriateness of the procurement strategy when the organization requested multiple contracts from McKinsey and Company for similar purposes and over a short period of time. Our only recommendation concerned the need to proactively address conflicts of interest in the procurement process of federal organizations. Other elements of our findings were addressed in the comments and recommendations that we made in our recent audit reports and have since been reinforced by recommendations issued by internal audit functions. The Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat has taken the measures to which it committed for relevant departments and organizations in response to our recommendation.
Focused on contracts awarded to McKinsey and Company, it highlights basic requirements and good practices that all federal organizations should follow when procuring professional services on behalf of the Government of Canada. Our audit of contracts awarded to GC Strategies, Inc. over much of the same period showed many of the same weaknesses in federal organizations' adherence to contracting rules and ability to demonstrate value for money. Federal contracting and procurement policies and rules exist to ensure fairness, transparency, and value for money, but they only work if they are followed. The solution isn't necessarily about creating new rules, but rather about making sure that those rules are well understood and properly applied. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayes. I believe, Ms. Reza, you'll lead us off for 5 minutes, please. Approximately 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I want to thank this committee for providing Public Services and Procurement Canada with an opportunity to discuss the Auditor General's Report 5 on professional services related to McKinsey. The report is, in fact, part of a series of audit reports. In 2023, the Prime Minister at that time asked the President of the Treasury Board and the Minister of PSPC to undertake a review of contracts awarded to McKinsey. Moreover, the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman conducted their own independent study. Taken together, the findings and recommendations of these studies point to 3 areas for improvement. First, the need to better comply with existing procurement rules. Second, the need to adequately document procurement decisions. And third, the need to improve overall quality control over our procurement practices. These areas for improvement are in no way unique to the focus of the audits on McKinsey contracts. Rather, these areas of improvement apply across all commodities in the procurement function. There is a fundamental need to build and maintain public trust in the procurement system. Depuis ma dernière comparution devant le comité,
Since I last appeared before this committee, PSPC has made significant efforts to strengthen the procurement process across the continuum. By continuum, I mean from the engagement in the early stages when a client department first identifies a requirement, to planning the procurement strategy, to the award, administration, and closeout of the contract. We have implemented new mandatory checklists for task authorizations and procurement file completion. We have increased the focus on procurement officer training and increased interactions and added requirements for attestation with suppliers. PSPC has also created the position of Chief Contract Quality Assurance and Records Compliance, focused on compliance and information management. Since it was introduced in 2024, this office has reviewed over 1,200 procurement files and trained over 600 procurement officers.
At hand, the Auditor General's scope is comprehensive as it examined the procurement practices of departments and agencies, and it looked at value for money. These are two sides of the same coin, Mr. Chair. On the value for money side, client departments are responsible for demonstrating sound stewardship and best value in their procurement actions and decisions. On the other side of the coin, actions related to procurement management are expected to be fair, open, and transparent, and meet public expectations in matters of prudence and integrity. With respect to the one recommendation in this AG report, PSPC is in agreement. We have put in place concrete measures to strengthen conflict of interest safeguards. In addition to our annual mandatory conflict of interest declaration for all PSPC employees, we have made explicit the requirement for the completion of an evaluator's confidentiality and conflict of interest certification for our solicitation processes. This measure ensures that evaluators explicitly attest to being free of conflicts of interest at various steps in the contract award process. The certification will be automatically included in the file documentation. En ce qui concerne d'autres observations du rapport,
With respect to other observations of the report, PSPC has already changed the administration of non-competitive national master standing offers by requiring clear justification by client departments. PSPC has also introduced limits on the value, duration, and amendments to minimize financial risk and encourage solution-based approaches. I have personally written to all my deputy head colleagues on the management of professional services procurements to underscore the importance of sound procurement practices to drive best value and accountability for results. I want to again thank the Auditor General for her reports on these matters. They have helped us improve our processes and ultimately strengthen the integrity of procurement of professional services. The changes that we have made are consistent with PSPC's commitment to continuously improve federal procurement practices. Thank you. And we thank you.
Members of the committee, and I'm very honored to be back again today to appear on behalf of the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces with my colleague, Lieutenant General Paul Prévost. And I want to reassure Canadians, as has my colleague from PSPC, that the department takes our responsibilities both for the defence and security of the country and the careful stewardship of the public's funds extremely seriously. We are always working to ensure the best value for taxpayer dollars while meeting our complex and evolving defense and security needs. This has become even more critical with the recent increase in defense investments. We welcome the additional oversight and recommendations we receive from external experts, including the Auditor General and this committee, that help us continually improve our programs, policies, and processes to deliver the best results for Canadians. Tel que l'expliqué dans le rapport de la vérification.
As the Auditor General explained in her report, about 15 of these contracts, total value of $29.6 million, were awarded by National Defence. Of them, 12 were subsequent commands to the original PSPC one, and one was issued by a non-competitive process via National Defence. The other two were subsequent orders in call-ups in a competitive manner. Much of what we carry out these days is based on internal expertise that has led our allies to regularly come to us for advice, for example, on matters of cultural change.
A single recommendation for departments to proactively ensure that there are no real or perceived conflicts of interest amongst those involved in the procurement process. We were also advised to keep implementing related recommendations from two previous reviews, our own internal audit from March 2023 and a March 2024 report from the Procurement Ombud. I'm very pleased to report that all the management action plans have been fully implemented. At D&D, we are committed to fair, open, and transparent processes, and we work diligently to uphold the Government of Canada's requirements and standards around contracting and procurement. We collaborate extensively with PSPC as the contracting authority for the Government of Canada to ensure we are following established policies and procedures. In the past few years, we've done a lot of work to strengthen our contracting policies and oversight, such as updating compliance frameworks, procedures, guidance, and training, strengthening information management policies and procedures, and establishing new quality control measures. Par rapport au conflit d'intérêts,
The AG report also prompted us to closely review how we communicate about conflict of interest across all levels of our department. All new hires and staffing actions are subject to a mandatory screening and questionnaire. But we've also introduced proactive screening with a mandatory conflict of interest questionnaire. And as part of the performance management cycle, employees must now affirm that they understand and adhere to values and ethics, including conflict of interest policies.
Committee members, we remain deeply committed to transparency, accountability, and rigor as we exercise our duties to safeguard Canada while optimizing use of the public funds entrusted to us. We have acted on the recommendations that we have received, and we will continue improving and evolving so that Canadians can have full confidence in the way we manage defence resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Mr. Corey, you have the floor for up to 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames.
Thank you, Chair, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee.
Being there with you in person, always preferable, but appreciate you accommodating us. Comme vous l'avez dit, je m'appelle Aaron.
As you have heard, I'm Alan Corey, and I am the Director General of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, its Executive Officer, and I'm happy to be with you as an organization mentioned in the report of 2024 on professional services produced by the Auditor General.
As mentioned, who is our General Counsel and Corporate Secretary for the CIB. Just for a bit of context, the CIB, as committee members would well know, is a Crown corporation. We were created by the CIB Act in 2017. And I'm proud to report that as of today, we've now invested over $17 billion in more than 100 projects across the country. Those projects have a total capital value of over $50 billion. 71 of those projects are in construction. 7 of them have been completed or in operation. This is important to understand the context of our use of professional services in general. The projects that we've invested in are impactful projects for our country. These are things like expansions of ports and airports, clean power systems across our country, irrigation, all of which are designed to drive economic productivity and growth in a rapidly changing world. Each of these investments are made as loans or equity investments. They're fully repayable with interest. That capital goes on to be redeployed in subsequent projects. And I would note that as of last year, the CIB reached the status of being self-sustaining, by which I mean our operating costs are more than covered by the interest we earn, so we do not require operating appropriation. Now, before we make any of these investments, we undertake the necessary due diligence that would be expected for large-scale investment. The CIB, like most asset management organizations, therefore engages various financial, legal, and technical advisors to provide advice in support of our investment decisions. The CIB is a relatively small investing team for the scope of our work, about 150 individuals, so we do rely on external advisors to support our work with technical advice and due diligence. At the end, to put it in context, at the end of last fiscal year, these professional services represent less than 1% of the total amount of our investments. Now, turning to the study at hand, as it's the focus of today's hearing, in all cases, the procurements we undertake at the CIB, we are committed to following robust procurement practices, including conflict of interest policies, and to ensuring value for taxpayers. I'll address these practices in a moment in relation to the 2 matters raised by the Office of the Auditor General. The Office of the Auditor General's report identified 3 contracts entered into by the CIB with McKinsey. These were all between 2018 and 2020, which predate my arrival as CEO. The 3 contracts, which had a total value of $1.4 million, were in the very early days of the CIB, a time when the CIB was really just ramping up and had a small number of employees. All three did follow the procurement policies of the day, and it's worth noting since that time the CIB has not contracted with McKinsey. Je me réjouis de l'occasion de...
I'm very pleased to be able to underscore the work carried out by the CIB, setting up policies and practices that are proactive and transparent and quite solid for procurement and conflicts of interest to ensure equity, transparency, and value for money for Canada.
To following best practices when procuring. We appreciate the Auditor General's recommendation, and I'm pleased to share the steps we've taken to address that single recommendation. Our procurement policy and code of conduct have been refined and updated since 2020, and we're always looking for ways to improve. Today, the CIB has robust practices to identify and manage procurements and to identify any actual or perceived conflict of interest. The CIB's procurement policy provides that the procurement of goods and services must be completed responsibly and with the highest standards of integrity. These policies are available on our website. And to address the OAG's recommendation specifically, contract owners and relevant CIB staff must now confirm they have no conflict of interest before any procurement moves forward. This requirement was added to our investment approval and our signature request templates as of September of 2024. This is in addition to the existing steps that ensure transparency, including all CIB employees required to complete annual attestations that cover compliance with the code of conduct and include proactive conflict of interest disclosures. And as outlined in our code of conduct, both employees and contractors must promptly notify us if any conflict, real or perceived, arises so that it can be handled appropriately. I appreciate the committee's attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Merci.
Thank you very much. We'll now begin our first round of questioning, which will involve 3 members, 6 minutes each. Ms. Kuzi, you'll begin for us, please.
Very much appreciated. In June, the House of Commons passed a Conservative motion calling on the government to recoup the $64 million wasted in the ArriveCan scandal from GC Strategies. Ms. Reza, as Deputy Minister, did you have any input on the government's decision to enforce this House of Commons motion?
No, I didn't have any input. We have, as you know, been very involved in terms of trying to recover money and working with CBSA in terms of identifying elements that can be recovered, as well as the RCMP.
The government has announced that they are only seeking $198,000 in damages out of the $64 million. Why is the government only seeking to recover 0.03% of the funds from ArriveScam?
I can start that question, and maybe I'll turn to Madame Poulin to give us more information. We look at every procurement, every dollar spent in terms of, is there abuse, fraud, and when we do find that in terms of overbilling, we go after the suppliers to seek that recovery from either themselves or through their supply chain. And in this case, that is, I think, on the GC strategy side. Mais peut-être tu peux rajouter quelque chose?
Would you like to add something, though, perhaps?
It's important to note that the amount that we're trying to recover from GC strategy, it's not linked in any ways to the ArriveCan. So it's an amount that it was overbilled prior to the ArriveCan, and GC Strategies was one of the prime contractors using our resources that overbilled the federal government. So the amount that you mentioned is the amount we're trying to recover because they haven't accepted to repay the amount when we ask them.
They haven't accepted. I mean, certainly they had contracts beyond ArriveScam, so I would expect that the amount would actually be greater than that we would seek to recoup, never mind just the funds from ArriveScan, but only 0.03%, $198,000. That's really a small amount compared to the total value of the contract for GC Strategies within that contract and even GC Strategies beyond that contract. Of the $198,000, Ms. Reza, how much has the government recouped to date, please?
To turn, and I'll just make the distinction that the $198,000 is from overbilling that is not associated with the CBSA strategies. And do you have that figure? Otherwise, we can come back to you.
No, thank you for the question. So just to put the question in context, the amount that we're trying to recover is tied to the 3 overbilling cases that were announced back in March 2024. And I'm pleased to announce that over the $4.5 million that we announced at that time, we have recovered $4.1 million. So the almost only amount left to be collected, it's the amount tied to GC strategy. And if we're looking at the legal cases that have been put forward in the Ontario court, we're seeking $400,000 because there's some damage that will be added to the amount that GC strategy owns to the federal government. So it's a big success because on those 3 cases, we almost recover more than 80% of the amount that were overbilled.
Okay, but you're not certain as to the 198,000, if any, you don't have that number with you as to if any of that 198,000 has been collected?
Again, we have put a statement of claim into the Court of Ontario because we were unable to recover that amount. That's why we're turning to the justice system in order to recover those funds from a legal procedure. So on a signifié le statement of claim à GC Strategy, puis on va être en procédure dans les prochains mois.
Okay, well, passed in the House was specific to the ArriveCan scandal and the $64 million. So it's my hope that the 198,000 would be recovered and that we could report on that as a later date as being recovered. Ms. Reza, in previous testimony to public accounts on this topic, you've stated, as far as recovery efforts are concerned, we've made the commitment to the minister to look at how we can recover the funds that were spent on this contract. Was the recommendation provided to the minister to recover the funds at an amount greater than $198,000?
That question is to be really examined by CBSA. CBSA is the authority whose budget it came from, and we've been working with them to look at some of the accounting around it to see what has been recovered, overbilled, so that work is underway. Je sais pas si tu as quelque chose à rajouter.
I'm not sure if you'd like to add something.
That we're dealing with McKinsey, not GC strategies in this report.
Ms. Yip, thank you. That's a point you can make, but as you know, I give members wide latitude here to raise questions when witnesses are before us. If witnesses aren't quite ready to answer, they can say so, and information can be sought later. Ms. Kuzi, you have about a minute left.
Thank you, Chair. I believe the title of the study is Professional Service Contracts, and certainly GC strategies would fall under professional services. Does PSPC, truly believe, after all of the waste, corruption, shady contracting, poor record keeping, subcontracting of basic tasks, and more, that the Canadian taxpayer should recover below 0.5% of the money that was wasted?
Again, and I think you're well aware, the issue is that the 198,000 is associated with overbilling that is not CBSA related. In terms of CBSA contracts with GC strategies directly, they are best placed to look at what they are going to be able to recover. We can certainly talk about the efforts that we're making in terms of managing additional oversight on the spend of professional services across the government.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kuzi. Up next, Mr. Housefather, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to deal with the previous line of questioning for 1 second, even though it has nothing to do with the report we're actually studying, 64. This is specific to a specific Auditor General report. The GC strategy is $64 million. Of course, it would be very simplistic to say all $64 million would be recoverable when GC Strategies was a company that took money from the Government of Canada and paid consultants to perform services, and we have no evidence that they didn't pay those consultants monies that were owed to the consultants. In fact, we probably would have received claims from those consultants had they not paid the consultants. Would that not be correct, Ms. Reza?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. So let me move now to this report that we're actually studying. Ms. Reza, one of the things that, and believe me, everything that I've ever seen from your department has been professional. I've always very much appreciated working with you in the department. I want to ask how things would be done different today based on some of the things that are in this report. For example, in 5.39 of the report, it talks about the fact that a national master standing offer was established in 2021 with McKinsey without sufficient justification. And then 19 non-competitive contracts were awarded by various departments under that national standing offer. And for 18 of the 19 contracts, there was not sufficient justifications documented for the non-competitive bids. And it says that PSPC didn't challenge sufficiently the departments. And I know it's a problem always, right, when you are responsible for overseeing, but you don't have direct authority over each of the departments. Can you talk to us about how you have changed procedures at PSPC to deal with both the awarding of the non-competitive standing offer without sufficient justification and the lack of, I guess, exercising authority over the departments?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think there's two interesting elements there. One is that these non-competitive national standing offers, which is a way that departments can make use of the provisions or whatever they need to buy from professional services, that McKinsey was one of 5, and that we've been using this method of supply for many years, since the 1990s, early 2000s, and it was in line with our interpretation that if the intellectual property belonged to one company, as did for McKinsey, that the GCRs, the government contracting regulations, permitted that as an exclusion. So what happened, it was established. So it wasn't preferential treatment for McKinsey. There was other companies that had it much longer. They came forward because their data set and their benchmarking was something that was in use across the government. And that's where I think we hit a tripwire, because it had been done in the past, and it was, from our perspective, a consistent use. But after this report, after the procurement ombudsman's challenging that even though the IP belonged to McKinsey, that didn't in any way mitigate the requirement for departments to be able to justify their use, we actually did an RFI, sent it to 5,000 suppliers, got many responses back, and as a result, we actually stopped all of the non-competitive national master standing offers in benchmarking, and we have now put in a new process because we agree it was not rigorous enough, and it didn't put enough challenge function. So I'm just going to pause here because the second part of your question, you asked for some examples of what's changed from that reality, and I'm going to ask Dominique to assist.
So yes, there's a lot of things that have changed since McKinsey, and I'm very thankful also for the OAG for sharing some of those lessons. So what we want to make sure is that competition is the norm. So in future, any benchmarking professional services that we need, that a client department will need, we're going to make sure that it's a competitive process. It's one of our competitive supply arrangement or setting offer that is being used. And even I would say those non-competitive national standing offer, they remain exceptional, very exceptional, so they now require ADM approval. So this is not something that I want to use in future. So we made that very clear. In terms of the challenge function, that was also, I have to say, almost a blessing from the OAG. Oftentimes, if you're a PG, you're a PG3, you have to deal with the client at the DG level. It's not that easy to say, well, we're going to challenge you on the procurement strategy that you want to put forward. You shouldn't be using a sole source here. We want you to compete, and it's going to take more time. The statement that we had as part of the OAG report were very well received by our staff. Give us this flexibility to say, no, client, this is not the proper procurement strategy. You cannot go non-competitive. We're going to be running a full competitive process. So those are examples that things that have changed as a result of those reports and the recommendation of the OAG.
Very interesting because having had the experience in the private sector of running a legal and purchasing department in a multinational, it's always difficult to push back against the client, whether it's the marketing department, whether it's sales, whether it's engineering, that wants to enter into an agreement and you don't agree with the methods that they're using. So should there be some, besides the fact that the Auditor General's report appropriately mentioned this and gave you some ammunition to push back, should there be some change in regulations from Treasury Board or somebody else giving PSPC greater authority to determine and override a client's request if it finds that it rises over a level of unreasonability of a certain standard?
To Maître Laporte to mop up. I think that's a super interesting question because what we've seen repeatedly from the AG report after report is the challenge function of PSPC. And I talked in my opening remarks, and I really, I'm very sincere about it, Mr. Chair, is around public trust in procurement. And I have to look at it through many different frames, from the abuse and fraud, from following the rule sets. But the challenge function is my third frame. And I see that that's an area that, from the AG reports, from my own experience as being the deputy head, we have a responsibility, but it is very hard to challenge function. We do 20% of the procurements. Even in the context of this report, we only did 24 of them, 24 of the 97 that were reviewed as the thing. So having that challenge function and being able to throttle it up and having the visibility of, we talk in the report about the chains of contracting. We may not have that visibility. So having the proper sets around challenge functioning, you asked about regulation. We have recently gone to Treasury Board, and one of the things that I don't think was evident to many is that until June, the Minister of PSPC did not have responsibility for services. We had authority to delegate for goods and constructions, but not for services. So we started to centralize that, and I'm going to turn now, Dominique, if you have anything to add.
No, sure, and it's an excellent point. So what we want to do is to be able to impose much more requirement on client and future. So, for example, for the use of our supply instrument, our standing offer, so to put condition, to put also reporting. Now it's in place, quarterly reporting on the usage that was done of our National Master Standing Offer. One of the things that did help a lot is also TBS. TBS play a critical role when it comes to the client or the business owner. And they did amend the directive on the management of procurement to include new requirement when managers or client department wants to source professional services. So this justification as to why it's needed, why it's required, why, for example, the staff that is in-house is not able to perform these functions has been built in. So that has been extremely helpful for PSPC because on top of that, we've got TBS providing guidance to business owner. And I have to say that, we are encouraging our staff, if, for example, you're challenging a client and you're not necessarily successful, to really escalate. So this is something that has been welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I, as committee chair, will do this. You can ask your question right up to your time. I will then allow the witnesses to answer, usually fully, unless it does drag on. So, Mr. Housefather, you are certainly out of time, but I appreciate your asking me anyway. Nonetheless, Monsieur Lemire pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci. Mr. Lemire, 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I must say that we much appreciate your approach on this matter. Ms. Reza, in 2023, the government announced that it would reduce budgets for consulting firms, saying it would save $7.2 billion over 5 years. This year, the budget voted in June tells us that the envelope set aside for consultants would rise by $7 billion. So can we make sense of this, please? Thank you for the question. This is something that we are now discussing within the department. To begin with, because I can only speak for PSPC, what goes on in that department with consultings. We have reduced our dependence on IT, for example. But within our department, well, we have to cover construction. Even here on the Hill, there are 800 people working here on the Hill in construction. So we have to keep in mind that even though the aim is to reduce the cost, there are major works underway, and these things can't be cut. We can't not hire the people to build the bridge. So much has been done to bring costs down internally and elsewhere, and I think we have some figures for you. Yes, let me quickly share some figures for PSPC. We've gone from 3.8 billion to 2.5. That's 1.1 billion in savings. So as Ms. Reza mentioned, this covers professional services, architecture, engineering, for basically all the real property projects across Canada. The proportion of professional services, for example, IT services, benchmarking services, there really isn't much of that overall in that area. That's why you need to, an overall, a real bird's eye view to understand what's going on. Thank you. I wish to add, though, that in the department, is there enough expertise to challenge the companies? Because if you haven't the engineers to evaluate what they're asking for, challenge that, then you can get people charging more than they should be. So is that an expertise we have within the government? Because this occurs in Quebec as well. It's something you see in Quebec. If you count on the companies entirely, you wind up spending on things you needn't actually be buying. Excellent point. I think that in the department we have about 500 engineers working across a number of areas and fields. Same thing for defense, I believe. So there is internal expertise that allows us to have good oversight over the plans, anything that we receive. Nevertheless, we need to follow up closely to ensure that we have the capacity and the rigor to carry out that challenge function. You need that expertise within the departments. I understand that it's up to the departments to ask the right questions, of course. So the Parliamentary Budget Officer in January 2025 found that the use of internal consultants in IT cost between 22 and 25% more than if the work had been carried out internally. Why are we contracting out rather than developing internal expertise? Let me begin. There are 2 or 3 things I can talk about here. Sometimes the expertise needed is needed only for, let's say, 6 months or a year. We don't have ongoing funding to bring that capacity on board as a corporate employee, let's say. Second, sometimes we can't find the expertise we need because consultants don't want to join the civil service. I know that may sound surprising to you, but that's a real challenge. So I have as a value the support of the civil service, and it plays a very important role when it comes to signing contracts. For example, April, IBM, a contract was awarded to them for $1.75 billion for modernizing benefits, and now it's at $4.4 billion supposedly. So where's all that money going? How come it costs so much more? Why are we depending on these subcontractors? And then IBM, of course, was behind Phoenix. So why aren't we developing this expertise as corporate expertise, internal expertise? Remember what happened with Phoenix. It was just a slippery slope and just went, right down the tube. So what could we do to make it more likely that people join the civil service? Yes, that's a possibility. We work with the Treasury Board and with IT in the field to see how we could develop more expertise. Very often the corporate intellectual property belongs, let's say, to IBM, so it's a bit difficult to onboard all that. But we could do better, and we also ask whether we really need to use the suppliers. Could we create something that's corporate within the government? How do you find the balance so that the taxpayers aren't paying so much more? We see that the civil service envelope is growing. It's costing a lot more, but doesn't necessarily lead to real services for Canadians, like the passport crisis and so on. Next round, then. Thank you very much.
Our second round, which will involve 5 members asking questions for different times. Monsieur Deltel, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Deltel, 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair, and good day, dear colleagues and ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the House of Commons. Thank you so much for your services rendered to Canada during difficult missions in Afghanistan and to NORAD, for example. Thank you so much. So, Mr. Chair, the Public Accounts Committee deals directly with taxpayers' money, who taxpayers are listening to us today. And we've seen in the last few years a sort of a laxism, which is very dishonoring, and the Auditor General has drawn our attention to it. There's also another element. Tens of millions of dollars have been managed very poorly with the ArriveCAN scandal, for example, and this is a reality. A few months ago, in June, the House of Commons adopted a motion to the effect that GC Strategies hire or pay us back $64 million. Where are we with that? Thank you for the question. As I was saying earlier, we have no visibility on that motion. The $64 million is not within our portfolio. It's with CBSA, and they are working with the RCMP, I believe, to see what they can recoup. What we are working on is the $200,000 via a statement of claim presented to the courts. And we're trying to recoup that. All right, so you're talking about $198,000 when most MPs elected by the electors are calling for the $64 million. So why don't we pull out all the stops to get that $64 million back? And if not, do you accept that we MPs require it? Thank you for the question. So for PSPC, what's within our purview, we have looked at that and consulted our legal counsel to see what we could recover. Even if we wish to recover, you have to be in a position to take it to court and to win in court. We are not the contracting authority. We are not the organization that had received the services, so our role is considerably restricted. Ms. Poulin earlier was mentioning sums that had been recovered. This was within an area of our purview, our competency, and elsewhere, did they fail to provide services and so on? And if they did, then you could certainly work up a statement of claim. We cannot do that. It depends on the agency that actually received the services, and in this case, it's CBSA. They must determine what to do. This is $64 million that were very poorly used, and taxpayers paid for it. We should act very promptly, at very least, especially when a parliament that has just been elected insists on this amount being recovered. And speaking of taxpayer money, the Auditor General's report regarding what went on with Mackenzie is really quite shocking. 9 out of 10 departments and several corporate and Crown corporations did not manage funds appropriately in their contracting, did not respect the suppliers or procurement policies, non-competitive awarding, no confirmation of delivery, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm quoting the report, and I can continue down this vein. So, Ms. Beck, your testimony a couple of days ago was very interesting. It was about healthy management and appropriate management of public funding. So how come things went so badly for you? Well, the Auditor General's report points out a number of things, and also our internal report as well, which picked up pretty much the same things about many of our contracts. And we also heard from the procurement ombudsman about pretty much the same services. So it is very important that we take all this seriously and bring about change. As you know, a good deal of investment is coming down the pipeline towards us, and we've done everything to ensure that this not take place again. But why did it happen in the first place? Were people turning a blind eye year in and year out? I wouldn't say they were turning a blind eye, but I can say that at the time, it was tributary to the situations at the time. We were under a good deal of pressure to get deliverables out, and we chose what was available in terms of contracts.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome back. Many of you have been here recently. Ms. Beck, we heard from your department last year about the waiving of the security clearance. What updates do you have since our last meeting on the issue?
I think it's on. Yeah, we think this is really important because of what's coming. So the requirement to have a really strong basis of compliance, of a fraud framework in place, of robust conflict of interest measures, and indeed you mentioned security. We have spent a lot of time and money investing in increased levels of security clearances, both for people and indeed in with our colleagues around town for the facilities themselves. So between the work we've done in establishing a greater oversight and compliance fraud framework with regular interventions at senior levels and a multi-layered approach to conflict of interest, first of all, determination, prevention, and resolution, we think we're in a much better position right now. And as I said earlier, greatly value the interventions by the Auditor General and indeed this committee.
In your opening statement, you mentioned the mandatory screening and then also proactive screening. So what is the difference?
You know, it's unfortunate that we have come to this place, but what we are doing now in every letter of offer is we're requiring that as part of the onboarding process, every new employee, every staffing action, so even if you're just changing jobs within the department, you need to go through a questionnaire and tell us if you think there is anything that could possibly be a conflict of interest. And one single yes answer means that you need to fill out a much more in-depth form, which we will then analyze and provide a decision on whether there is some mitigation required, whether actually whatever the thing is not a problem, or in fact, if this means you cannot take up the new position. So it's much more rigorous and much more deliberate.
Okay. Sometimes the department will occasionally procure goods and services through a non-competitive process. Can you explain this non-competitive process and why it is used?
Very much depend on the need, and maybe one good example is when we have an urgent military requirement and we have a very specific need, for instance, for our troops forward deployed in Latvia. We would go through a separate process that identifies we need this particular piece of equipment, working, of course, closely with our colleagues at PSPC and determine a supplier and go in and procure that particular item. Often that would be under a national security exemption.
And
that would probably be the most often when we would use that sort of process.
So what percentage of contracts are used in a non-competitive format?
I don't have that number. Really? You know? Okay. All right.
It's something that we track very carefully because we are always looking at competition. So PSPC does about 20 to 25% of the procurement in the federal system directly. And I think we're at about 80%, 79%, 80% is competitive as well as the value.
Ms. Beck, you were saying that all management plans have been fully implemented. What does that entail?
So of course, it varies depending on which report has been provided. But for instance, one of the issues that has been flagged regularly, I would say not just in this context, but is documentation, right? Is proper information management, is the ability for an auditor general or indeed ombuds to be able to go back years later and ascertain how did we do this, was it properly documented, and not just retaining the pieces of paper or the decision-making process, but justifying it in a way that's understandable many years later. So this is what we have focused on in particular, making sure we have way better information management systems. The training that has been implemented means that those who are actually writing up the statements of work and writing up the justifications are writing it in a way that's going to actually be intelligible to someone who's coming to look at that several years later. So it's a range of different things.
Very short question, or if you want, you can hold it over for later.
I don't know if this is... Ms. Reza, the organizations did not receive deliverables listed in the contracts, so 18% out of the contracts. Did the organization ever receive any cost savings from having the deliverable monies returned back?
Question would be best addressed to the actual client departments or those that did the contracting. We have no visibility on that.
Thank you very much. Suivant, encore une fois, c'est Monsieur Lemire pour 2 minutes.
Again, Mr. Lemire, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Ms. Reza, I would like to know whether, when it comes to modernizing the payment systems, how many contracts were given to internal consultants to develop that platform? Would you like to answer? We don't have that information, but that is something that we could provide to the committee if it so wishes. Please do. We know that one contract was signed with IBM, as I said earlier, in April 2021 for $1.75 billion. In 2024, the contract is evaluated at $4.4 billion now. So that's another matter I'd like information about. Who are these subcontractors, given that IBM got rid of its software in 2021? So I'll let you get back to me on that. So intellectual property, a big issue. It doesn't seem, well, we should develop, I think, more IT projects within our departments in Quebec. Depending on, since on SAP for the SACLIC project, you know, IT costs are exploding here as well. But the feds aren't using the same approach as Quebec is, which wisely called for an inquiry. Now, modernizing pay, it takes 4 cycles to get through that, and of course the cost will go up. So the Auditor General's office had underscored in the report that many IT systems are deficient. We saw the example of public safety, where they can't really see or know where funding goes in First Nations police forces. Modernization will cost about $5 billion or more. Why isn't the sector actually undertaken a digital transformation internally? And how are we doing on digital contracts? Perhaps you could ask the departments that actually have responsibility for that within PSPC. I don't think that that is our responsibility per se for at least that project. But I can get back to a point that is of import, and I think it was also stated in the audit. We must work to better foresee the costs of a contract. This is a new trend, you see. There are many reasons why costs are difficult to predict. There are costs that take a couple of years to kick in, and then, of course, there are economics, pressure on costs, pressure upwards, affected by our friends in the United States, and so on and so forth. So what could we do to have a better line of sight on the eventual costs of projects? This is something that we could do. May I call for a written answer? Yes, please. All right. Send to the committee list of current IT projects underway, estimates of the costs, how much they will cost, what's your prediction, and also send in by writing the cost of professional services and special services per department. And are you still doing business with McKinsey? Thank you. Thank you. We don't have access to all that data, but we'll do our best via the Treasury Board. Thank you.
To our next member, Mr. Kirk, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Welcome all the witnesses today. I'll start with Mr. Hayes. Is it true that departments were tailoring their competitive contract procurement processes to suit McKinsey? Based on the report.
Thank you very much. We did find that there were a few instances where we were concerned that there were procurement strategies adopted in order to obtain services from McKinsey. For example, we talked about a situation where departments waited for the national master standing offer to be put in place, and that took about a year without any justification for why they waited for that long. So perceptions will be raised when situations like that happen.
Would you agree that that would predetermine the outcome of the contract bid?
In certain cases, we're talking about non-competitive contracts, right? So those would be contracts that were intended to be sent to McKinsey in the first place. But if if a decision, a contracting strategy decision was made to wait or to make requirements too strict that only one bidder could apply, well, that raises concerns about favoritism.
And in your report, did you find that in any of the competitive contract bids?
I'm going to turn to Mr. Swales. I think we did. I think we saw some situations where there were requirements that were identified as being a bit too strict, but changes weren't made, and the reasons for not making changes weren't documented. I'll just see if Mr. Swales has anything he wants to add.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were two contracts where we saw that there was only a single bidder, which means that those were competitive structures. And the concern was that there seemed to be some restrictive nature to the criteria that may have contributed to there being only one bid.
Okay. Now, you said that there was only one bid. Now, was that because, in that finding, was that because the goalposts were moved by McKinsey, or by the, like, why was there only one bid to that?
I think the issue that we raised was that we certainly did not see any instances of McKinsey being involved in establishing the criteria for any of the contracts that we looked at. So that was one scenario we did not see. Mm-hmm. The issue here was that other bidders were raising concerns about the restrictiveness of the criteria, and those concerns were not properly addressed in our view. And so that certainly, leaves the impression that those provisions were better suited to McKinsey than the other competitors.
And that what you just said there, was that in the case of the one was that in the case of the one bid on that contract?
Yes. So these were a contract for CBSA, the Border Services Agency, and another one for Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. Okay.
So whenever we get into the realm of predetermined, or what could be predetermined for the outcome of a contract bid, we walk the fine line of contract bid rigging. Did you see any of that in that case?
So we're not in a position to conclude on whether or not there were contracts that were bid rigged or anything like that. What we raise in these reports is concerns about the justifications and the processes followed. The findings that we have signaled here really point to the importance of departments identifying their evaluation criteria, their requirements, and documenting why suppliers are chosen. In the case of situations where bidders raise concerns about the restrictiveness of requirements, it's important for the departments to consider that and document why they make changes or why they don't make changes.
I guess I'll to Ms. Reza, based on the questions I've just outlined for Mr. Hayes and Mr. Swales, in your opinion, was there any walking the fine line of contract bid rigging on that one contract?
So first off, I think just as a way of context, just as we've indicated, there was 97 contracts, 204 million, both for crowns and for departments. I'll just be honest, at PSPC, we did 24 of the contracts. 19 of them were through the national standing offer that was non-competitive. So the majority was there. It's hard for me because I'm not sure whether or not we heard a contract authority on that. So in general, I would say this.
Sure.
When it goes back to that challenge function rule.
Thank you. That is your time. I'm sorry, Ms. Rizzo, were you still speaking?
No, I was going to say that I think it's really important that challenge function on the requirements, is it reasonable or not reasonable? They set the technical requirements to clients. Does the plane fly? Does it go underwater? And we need to challenge whether or not that's a reasonable bandwidth. And so that's where I think some of the gray happens.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tester-Dirksen, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll ask some questions, just following up on my colleague, Mr. Curick's questions. So we're talking a little bit about bidders raising concerns about the requests for bids. I'm curious to know a little bit more about how much deference a department owes to bidders. If a bidder is critiquing the restrictiveness of a particular proposal, how much time, staff, energy, and effort do you put into addressing that before it becomes unreasonable, for example?
I'll just talk a little bit about the process. Usually at PSPC, we do the big procurements, not the small ones. So because they're big and they're a real economic driver for Canada, we have a tendency to do an RFI to look at the market assessment beforehand. We try to build in the questions that we want to ask there so that we're able to formulate whether it's going to be pre-qualified, a down select, an RFP. That gives the bidder many opportunities to weigh in with their insights and their views. Often we do it one-on-one in confidentiality because there's commercially sensitive information, they want to share it. And we try to work with the client as well as the supplier to say, you know what, this is too restrictive. Because one of the indicators at PSPC is competition is the best, I'm going to say sunshine. We want to have competitive bids. So we've got a problem. One is if we only get one bidder, problem. And we're talking through what we're doing now to make sure we get more bidders. And we try to work with the client departments to say, if you loosen this, if you adjust this, you're going to get better competition, which is going to drive better value. And one thing I think is important for Canadians and for parliamentarians to be aware, we're finding it hard to attract people to bid. Suppliers are getting antsy. And I think that's an important piece too. We want to make sure that the federal ecosystem is seen as having integrity and competition. So these are areas where that restrictive nature needs to be challenged. You probably have another question, but did you want to adjust or add?
I'm just going to say also, for example, if we have an RFP, request for proposal, and one of the bidder realize, well, this is too restrictive, there's a Q&A process by which they can raise that and bring that to the procurement, to the contracting officer's attention. And oftentimes adjustment will be made, talking to the client and saying, well, do you absolutely need that specific requirement? So there is this process that is in place. So we do interact with bidders, but it has to be within the proper framework of the RFP, or as mentioned by DM Riza, the context of a request for information.
Yeah, I guess that begs the question that how far do you go in the opposite direction where, you have to be careful you're not compromising the integrity of the work you're trying to do by loosening the restrictions too much? Like, is that a fear or something that you consider when you're entering these negotiations?
Because there is a requirement. The client departments need to buy something that does X. I'm thinking of a public safety requirement right now, and I thought, is it too restrictive? What can I do to change it? And they were able to demonstrate that it had to meet these requirements to be able to fulfill their public safety responsibilities. So it can be a little bit expanded, but other times not expanded. And they're very technical. We buy goods, construction, and services, and they have to meet a technical level, which sometimes prohibits the expansiveness. Did you want to add anything?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
You've got a minute and a half. Or just a...
Excellent. Okay, so a question for the Auditor General, and this is actually something else that my colleague, Mr. Carrick, brought up as well. With respect to certain departments that were seeking benchmarking services that may have been available under other national master standing offers, your report states that the Auditor General was unclear why those departments chose to wait rather than use another procurement option. So the use of the word may there begs a little bit of curiosity. Do you have a sense of how likely the availability of other better options actually was?
Thank you. I don't have that information for you, and that's partly because what we would have expected to see was documentation for why they did in fact wait. They identified a need, waited a year, and used this vehicle. So I think really what we're after with this is all of the decisions that are being made in a procurement process should be documented. I recognize that in this circumstance we're talking about a strategic decision, and there could be other reasons, but we wouldn't have been expecting a mountain of evidence to show why a strategic decision like this was made, but we didn't see anything to show why.
Thank you. That is your time now. We're going to begin our third and our last round, which will consist of, again, 5 members posing questions. Mr. Stevenson, you'll lead us off for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I want to boil it down to a little straightforward part. I'll start with Mr. Hayes, and I think I know the answers, but I want to make sure that I go there before I go to Ms. Reza. So when you looked at it in your audit, every department had rules that were set out, checklists on how to deal with all of foreign contract or outside contracts, correct?
That's correct. I mean, every federal department's subject to the same regulations and policies.
That's good. So in your determination, there was a bunch of the audits that found that I've forgotten the numbers exactly, 10 out of, or 13 out of 17, a bunch of the contracts did not actually follow those. Now, were you, in your audit, were you able to determine the reason, whether it was lack of knowledge from the people enforcing those departments, or was it because they were told to get the job done and don't worry about the rules? Could you determine which reason they were not followed?
Well, in some cases, if we're talking about the decisions to make to go with particular procurement strategies, there can be a variety of reasons. One thing that we did raise in the report was at the end of the procurement process, why did a bidder get asked to submit an invoice before work was done? The drivers on those kind of decisions can be different. Fiscal year ends, for example, and trying to get amounts in before the end of the year. But really, I guess what I would say to you is on this point is that is a critical question to identify why rules aren't being followed, because really what is important is identifying where efficiencies can happen. As the Auditor General has said many times, we don't necessarily need more rules. We need to follow the right rules that will
a good portion of that is more the documentation doesn't say either way what the reason was. You don't have in your audit an ability to determine what the reason was either way, whether it was lack of enforcement or going around it. Either way, you cannot tell that.
I can't tell you that there were particular reasons. In fact, if we did see that evidence, we would have noted that in our report.
Okay. So then to Mr. Reza, you mentioned there earlier that it seemed that going back to your challenge function from PSPC, that you do not have the ability to necessarily tell the departments or enforce from the departments whether they have followed the rules or they have gone around the rules. And then not having the documentation, you don't have the ability to necessarily say, departments, you needed this, because you're looking at this after the fact, correct?
Mostly correct. If I could just add one footnote that I think would be helpful, and I'm going to take us into the world of procurement. Bids come in, the bids get separated. The financial aspects of the bid stay within PSPC, and they do an evaluation. The technical bids go to the client departments. They do an evaluation. Each department has their own evaluation teams, their own paperwork, and I think up until recently, the bids would come back together, but the quality of the paperwork to be able to document the decision, did everybody fill out their conflict of interest? Did everybody have the security? That was put together in a folder, paper folder. What's changed? We moved to e-procurement. We've put in so many checklists. We put in a director of compliance that's reviewing every file for completion. To get to your point, will we be able to tell better what is the reason why the rules were not followed?
Okay.
Or if they were not followed.
I got one question that come to me from what Ms. Beckett said, that it seemed to be that there was, in this process, there was self-reporting, that the individuals had to fill out the checklist and say, I think I might have a reason why there might be a conflict. But on the other end of it, there's no positive end from the department to say, I think you have one because of this. It's all based on the individuals, not the other way around, correct? So there's not necessarily the oversight from the department is all reliant on somebody else on self-reporting.
Juste activer le microphone, s'il vous plaît.
Someone, one more. Okay. someone self-declaring for a conflict of interest versus something where we're talking about compliance within a fraud framework. So it's trust but verify when it's personal, right? You're coming.
Okay.
You're
You didn't say
right?
that part before. You just said
Right.
the self.
Mr. Stevenson,
Right.
your time has expired. I'm going to allow Ms. Beck and then Ms. Reza to answer, and then we'll go to Mr. Osborne.
So that would be one aspect of it is I'm asking you, do you have a conflict of interest? I don't know if you have another business on the side. You need to be able to tell me that. We can check, and we would if there was something that looked suspicious. But more importantly, I think for what we're talking about right now is in the process that we're conducting, and say we're in the process of procuring something, if a form is not filled out properly or if a section of the form is incorrectly signed, that we can see. That we have layers of supervisors who will check, and we have risk management and fraud oversight committees. So it's a little bit different.
It's a mini triage, right? We have a responsibility. We have a code of values and ethics. Each employee must adhere to it. On top of that, bring in, if you're part of a procurement process, Madame is responsible for oversight for almost the whole government in terms of looking for fraud. So it's a whole combination of how to triage it, but we need to document those steps better.
Thank you very much. Up next, Mr. Osborne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question is for both Ms. Beck and Ms. Reza. We are in a changing geopolitical world. If you're watching the weather, you can see it's about to change. How do you balance protecting national security, our sovereignty, with your ability to ensure that procurement is fair, open, and transparent?
Okay, we could talk about it from two different aspects. The Prime Minister recently announced a Buy Canada approach, which will be looking to make sure that Canadian suppliers have opportunities to compete, whether it's through Canadian content, Canadian inputs, increased SMEs. So we're looking to build that ecosystem. And to do that, we need to be stable in terms of making sure all those areas that we just described, whether it's making sure the rules are adhered to, the challenge function, how we buy things. So I didn't manage my fourth frame, but that's one that I think about often in terms of procurement. And we also have recently the Prime Minister has announced a new Defense Investment Agency, which is really designed to meet the moment in terms of looking at the Canadian ecosystem of Canadian military suppliers, as well as some of the foreign military sales. Did you want to add anything?
And I think it goes to the partnership that's required across the whole of government to be able to deliver effectively, quickly, yes, but managing risk at the same time. So as Ms. Reza was saying, most of these procurements in the future will still be competitive, even though we know there is an urgent need for much of the equipment for the Canadian Armed Forces. We still want to make sure there are lots of opportunities for Canadian business to be able to benefit from economically, as well as, of course, the broader society. So it's working through what defense procurement strategy will achieve, is most likely to achieve both of those goals at the same time.
Ms. Reza, you talked a little earlier, my colleague, Mr. Stevenson, about keeping the financial aspect of a bid away from the technical aspect. If you could speak about that a little bit more, and just wondering how you balance the amount of a procurement bid versus the technical aspect of a procurement bid, and whether or not that is standard across the board.
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. It's an excellent question. There's a range. It depends on what we're buying in the commodity. Are we more concerned about the best price? Is something a common commodity that we're really looking just to buy and procure? Or is it something very bespoke and niche market where we need the expertise? We may weigh more towards the technical. So we keep them separate in terms of additional checks and balances for integrity, so that there's always a chance for them to come together and nobody knows the order of the bids. Did you want to add anything on this?
No, I fully agree with what the DM said. And in terms of the split, sometimes we can see, for example, what is very common is to see a split 70% technical, 30% price. But if it's a more commodity type of goods, then we're going to give more weight to the pricing. So it does vary, and there's no set standard. So this is something that is agreed with the client, depending on what is most important. Is it cost-driven or it's basically quality-driven?
And it goes back as another check and balance. It's a challenge function. We have to agree beforehand in terms of the procurement strategy, what is going to be the individual weight. So that also helps manage issues and being more transparent. The suppliers know the ratings of the bid as they go in.
That answer. Mr. Laporte, you had talked earlier about measures that were put in place, particularly by Treasury Board, and Mr. Hayes may want to weigh in on this a little bit as well, but just if you could go a little deeper into what the new requirements are. I know the Auditor General had said there's rules in place. It's just that they weren't always followed. So the new measures put in place by Treasury Board to create clarity of process and ensure fair competitiveness, and also so that we know we are attracting competitive bids and it's attractive to those that are bidding.
So thanks for the question. So we've put PSPC. I'll start with PSPC. PSPC has put a lot of measures in place. DM Reza spoke about the Quality Assurance and Records Compliance Office. So this is key, I think, to the issue that was discussed. How can we ensure, for example, that in future we're able to go back to the record and see exactly what did happen from a procurement strategy standpoint? So we have a team. We have a senior director who's now in charge of that, and they did review 1,600 files. We want to make sure that directors are also talking to their procurement officer, having also looking at them, and always in a constructive way. So what is missing? What was the reason that it was, we didn't have that element on file? How can we make sure that we remedy that in future? So I have to say that this group has been, it's been quite impressive in terms of the work that has been done on that front. I would say also a lot of training. One module, for example, was competition is the norm, and we were addressing non-competitive process and what are the exact situations where they should be reserved. We spoke about also the new measure that we've put in place on July 1st. We've put a lot of new measure to put more kind of robustness in terms of when it comes to professional services. So if a client wants to put in place a contract for professional services, more than $20 million, they need to seek the ADM approval. Just in itself, oftentimes, that was left to the manager. And maybe the DG or the ADM had no oversight that, the department was about to put a contract in place of more than $20 million. So this is an example of a measure that has been put in place. We also wanted to make sure that we were limiting the value of these contracts. So it's now limited to a certain amount. And also when we spoke about the situation where we have only one bidder. So in future, say we run a process, we'll run a competitive process, there's only one bidder. So that, again, will trigger something we're going to have to confirm, validate with the ADM of the client department, just to confirm that the technical specifications were not too restrictive in that case. So those are examples of procedures that have been put in place by PSPC to make sure that we've learned from, the finding of the OAG and the OPO. And on top of that, we're working closely with TBS because we can influence, as a contracting authority, the procurement process. But oftentimes, a lot of decision, as explained by DM Reza, rests with the business owner when defining the requirement. So TBS has put measure in place. For example, if it's an IT contract, they need to make sure that they check with the CIO to ensure that they don't have the in-house resources or expertise to do that internally. So there's a lot of check and balance that have been put in place for a new manager now to put in place a contract of professional services. They need to satisfy themselves that they don't have any staff that have the ability to do that. So this is quite positive in terms of when we're looking the collaboration that took place between PSPC, between TBS, to establish a new framework that is much more robust when it comes to procuring professional services.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Hayes, I think you have a comment you'd like to make, which I'll allow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll make this brief. In response to your question, I think the only thing I would add is with new rules and with requirements for processes and a pressure to move quickly, it is important for everyone to understand why the rules are there, how they should be applied in a day-to-day way, but also as new organizations are coming into the sphere, that they are aware of the accountability and the requirements. We will be in to audit the new organization. We'll be looking at how defense procurement is going to be happening. So I would just encourage everybody to look at the reasons why maybe some of the failures happened that we found. But I also want to mention that the strength of the internal audit functions in all of these departments and by the Controller General is also a very important tool for improvement. Thank you.
Et voilà. Merci beaucoup. Suivant, c'est Michel Lemire encore.
Thank you very much. Now we will have Mr. Lemire again. Last round, 2.5 minutes, sir. Let me begin with Mr. Corey from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. I'd just like to point out that sometimes we have another screen in the back here which allows us to see people online. This perhaps had an effect on our not putting questions to him because he couldn't see him, so I may put some rather boring questions in as much as I won't allow you time to answer, and I will ask you to send in written answers. Could you give me, in writing, your view of regional economic development? What is a regional or distant region for you? I understand that I've got the CIB plan here, basically a lot of big city projects, Témiscamingue, for example, a lot of industry up there that's producing a lot of the GDP of Canada, but I don't think that the Canada Infrastructure Bank is really up there. So just give me something in writing, please. Terribly sorry. Little time. I also have a question for Mr. Laporte. Just a short question, please, and then I stopped the clock, by the way. So the question is for Mr. Corey, yes? Is it all right? Mr. Corey, will you provide a written answer?
The committee so wishes, of course we can. I would just say the CIB does have projects in every province and territory, and we've worked really hard to develop programs like our broadband for remote communities that do reach corners of the country. So we have projects, wind power, broadband, et cetera, across the country, and I'm happy to share.
Thank you. We look forward to that fulsome response. Mr. Lemire, was it?
Mr. Lemire, continue, please. Thank you very much. So, my question. Do you have at PSPC any contracts now underway with Mackenzie? Since 2023, there is no contract out of SPAC at PSPC. Do you know whether? Because my understanding is that PSPC also has some responsibility for digital transformation within the government. Generally speaking, I understand that you have areas of responsibility, but you also have some supervisory responsibilities. I'm not quite clear on those. And it looks like there isn't perhaps enough cooperation. I have the impression that some are working independently, and which makes it difficult to create economies of scale in digital matters within the government. Could you tell me what role PSPC plays in contracting, and could you perhaps provide more leadership? We don't work in silos. We work closely with all our department clients to ensure that the departments are able to use our resources and we reach economies of scale. We are trying to change our procurement practices, the way we carry out procurement, and it's using all the digital capacities now coming on board that we will get there. I am happy to hear this. But based on answers that I had received in the past, I sort of felt that some departments said, well, that's not quite how it works for us. Therefore, I wanted to ask you this overall question, and I certainly hope that that's where we're headed, as you say. Also, regarding conflict of interest procedures, because this has been discussed, when it came to Mackenzie, the conflict of interest didn't seem to be the principal issue. It was rather the department kept awarding contracts to McKinsey one after the other. So McKinsey got, almost more control than the government did over the behavior of departments. So how can we ensure that in the future, no such firm will ever be able to be awarded so many contracts from departments because, they have their own view of the world, and if we haven't the same view within the government, then we might wind up depending on them. Well, this is what Ms. Reza had brought up, competition. When you ensure that you have competitive procurement well installed, then you'll have more players. As for McKinsey, even though the amounts were quite high, it was not the biggest player. It had 13% of professional service contracts. There were other firms qualified that also received contracts. All right, I'm nearly out of time. Let me just say that you say it's important to move to competition, and I encourage you to do so to increase transparency and better use of public funds. Thank you very much.
Kuzi for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Hayes, your office's report on professional services speaks to a clear disregard for the rules, notably for McKinsey. But this is something we have also seen repeated in other reports, specifically the June 2025 report on GC strategies. Why do you think federal departments and Crown corporations have not felt the need to comply with the rules?
Thank you for the question. Of course, our audit of McKinsey, our audit of the professional services contracts to GC strategies cover the same period. So it's not surprising to us that we would have found similar weaknesses. And in fairness, I think it's possible that those exist elsewhere in the public service as well. What we're hoping comes from the recommendations that we made in previous reports, the one that we make here in terms of conflict of interest, and the ones that have been made by the internal audit shops and the Controller General, is that strengthening the controls around why contracts are being selected or being put in place, why public servants can't do it, why a contractor is needed, and of course why selection of a particular contractor has been made, and then at the end of the day, the deliverables that have been achieved. I'm hoping that by implementing stronger documentation and controls around that, we will see better processes, better approaches, and better value for money.
Do you think PSPC, under their mandate as the central purchasing and contracting agent of the federal government, should exercise more pushback and power when departments try to evade contracting rules or manipulate the rules?
I was really encouraged to hear the response from the Deputy Minister earlier about how our audit has supported the experts in her organization. And I want to emphasize that there are experts in her organization to push back and to identify and support departments in the proper application of rules and also in the strategies that they select for contracting. I think that's a very positive outcome. I'm thankful that we were able to support that.
Aim at chains of non-competitive contracts. Do you believe the government currently has the tools to address issues found under these chains of contracts?
What we expect is that the government will follow its policies to support competitive and transparent procurements. In terms of the chains that we found, a decision was made in some cases non-competitively and in other cases competitively to issue a first contract. But what should happen after that is a similar assessment of whether or not competitive procurement should be applied to open it up to other suppliers. As we've heard from some of the other witnesses, that's the way that you get to the best value for money for Canadians.
Across 85% of departments and Crown corporations reviewed for this audit, you found frequent disregard for one or multiple stems of procurement rules. How is it possible that this level of non-compliance is so persistent across our federal government?
I think that's, again, that takes us back to the pervasiveness of our findings, both in this and the GC strategies audit of areas that can be improved. I'm hopeful that with the additional attention on both the procurement process, conflict of interest requirements, and I want to highlight the importance of proactivity with conflict of interest declarations, specific to procurement, that we will find tighter and more transparency in these procurement processes.
After completing these audits, who do you ultimately view as accountable for ensuring the rules are followed? Would it be the minister?
I would say that every deputy minister and every chief executive officer of the Crown corporations are responsible for making sure that procurement processes are followed in their organization and they can be accountable for the spending of taxpayer money.
Mr. Couric, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reza. Of the $64 million that was awarded to GC Strategies, how much did you and the CBSA determine was stolen from taxpayers through overbilling and fraud?
On the CBSA aspect of it, I think CBSA is working through or have indicated what they're going to be doing with the RCMP.
So
I don't have the visibility on the invoices.
But just to make it clear, on November 6th, you said that you were going to help the CBSA go through invoices to see if there was any overbilling and fraud.
We've made the active offer to help them. I don't know, Catherine, if you have anything to add in terms of did we...
Well, I will ask this then, if you guys don't know, has your new minister Lightbound asked PSPC to comply with the House's motion to get the taxpayers' money back?
Thank you, Ms. Couric. Your time is up, but I will allow a response for this before we go to the next member.
Been briefed on ArriveCan in general. We have not gone through the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're turning to Mr. Housefather for the last tool. Daniel Tour, merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Again, coming back to this issue, regardless of whether the House adopted a motion or not, saying that $64 million should be recovered, if there's no legal basis to recover monies that the House demands be recovered, I don't know how the Government of Canada would sue. There are some monies perhaps within the $64 million that might be recoverable once the PSPC and public safety go through, or CBSA go through this. But of course, the whole $64 million is not recoverable because some of that money was clearly paid to contractors of GC Strategies. Again, Ms. Riza, to come back to my question, has any contractor of GC Strategies ever come and approached the government to say they were not paid?
I don't believe so. I am thinking about the one that came in GC Strategies in the initial, but by far no sub has come to us with that information, with the exception of there's that small company that raised the issues and came to OGO.
Right. And just so that I understand, when we make legal claims from the Government of Canada, we make legal claims where the Government of Canada attorneys actually believe that the money was improperly taken and should be recovered. Is that correct in the general basis?
Yes.
So regardless of a House motion that is adopted, if the lawyers from the government believe that there is no legal basis for claiming the full amount of $64 million, we wouldn't make a frivolous claim before the courts. Would that be correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to defense, please. I wanted to ask Lieutenant General Prevost, who hasn't had much of a chance to intervene today. There have been a number of external reports dealing with D&D contracts and compliance and conduct. And I'm just wondering what D&D has been doing to, go through the reports and improve compliance and improve conduct. Can you sort of talk also about what you're doing to monitor things as they go, as you take the recommendations and try to improve things?
Thank you, Mr. Here we go. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair, which I took twofold here. I think some of the questions were more about the compliance on the procurement process, which I think DM Beck has answered already on everything that's been going. We take, obviously, stewardship of public funds very seriously, and as the ADM responsible for professional conduct and ethics in the department, accountability, integrity are things that are near to my heart. If the question has to do on the work we've done in professional conduct and culture using Mackenzie there, if Mr. Chair, if time allows, I'll just set a bit of the context on why we leveraged Mackenzie for a contract. So the Chief Professional Conduct and Culture, my organization, was stood up in the spring of 2021 in the wake of a series of serious allegations on sexual misconduct. The institution was stood up in that summer with only 11 people. At the head, General Carignan, who is now our chief of defense. So she was the first leader of that organization for 3 years. Only 11 people to look at a crisis we had never seen before, and a crisis of magnitude, and a problem we didn't understand very well, although there had been various reports before. Something we haven't discussed too much today, sometimes we leverage outside contractors when you stand up a new organization, when you don't have the expertise on the problem that you're dealing with, or the capacity to deal with only 11 people. Jean Carignan had the mission to, one, stand up an organization, which has now grown to 400 people, to look at conduct a culture, but also the expertise, which we didn't have. We didn't have that expertise. We couldn't find much on military culture in academia, stakeholders. So this is the reason why we turned to outside firms to help us out with this. McKinsey, as was mentioned many times, was part of an NMSO, National Master Standing Offer. And we understood from their previous work and their proprietary benchmarking, working with private sector, public sector, that was a good contractor to start our work. And our first two contracts came in that summer. The first one, if you'll recall at the time, there had been a lack of trust from the members in the chain of command, lack of trust in the reporting mechanism. So the first contract was to leverage McKinsey to understand what are the complaints mechanism in the defense system, and how do they map out. And it's quite a complex complaint system, from human rights complaints to grievance complaints to workplace harassment and violence prevention. So 23 different complaint systems. We needed to map this out. From the 11 people they had initially, some coming from the outside, they didn't have that expertise. So McKinsey helped us out there. And the second one, the second contract was, there had been 500 recommendations from various reports that related to culture. We didn't have the capacity to analyze those 500 recommendations, which one, they were from various authors. Justice Fish is one of them. Justice Arbor came later, but there was Justice Deschamps before. So we used McKinsey to map out those recommendations with common themes, common solutions, differing solutions from different authors. And this allowed us to present to the government in 2023 our CIP, our Comprehensive Implementation Plan, which is now the work plan which Defense follows to change the culture. 206 recommendations. Madame Arbeau has 48 recommendations in there. And we are now 50% complete on those recommendations, 70% at the end of this year. Madame Arbeau's report will be also done at the end of the year, with now Bill C-11 being tabled in Parliament. So overall, a lot of work. That work would not have been possible without the help of outside contractors. The reason why McKinsey was leveraged is because it met the requirement and was available as one of the procurement tools we had at the time. We didn't have allies as well.
We are well over, so I appreciate your understanding, Mr. Housefather. No, I'm going to leave it at that. Yeah, you're welcome to follow up individually. I want to thank all the witnesses for coming in. I'm going to adjourn this meeting so we can go into camera. You're all excused. Thank you for coming as we continue our study into this important topic. Have a nice day. This meeting.
Thank you.